Hi there, I'm Des.
And I'm Tim, and together Des and I head up the men's ministry Momentum Australia.
Momentum has multiple functions, but primarily our aim is to help men to succeed in life, to do life better.
We run a weekly radio show that goes all around Australia where we talk about anything and everything that relates to men.
And we encourage men to do life in community, to do life with other men where we can be accountable, we can be welcome, we can be open and honest about what's happening in our world.
We'd love you to have a look around our website. That's momentumaustralia.org. There you'll find a bunch of resources to help you on your journey and all of our previous episodes and topics.
We thank you for your interest in Momentum Australia, and we hope you enjoyed this video today.
Well, welcome to this week's Momentum. It is Tim and Des with you all around Australia, and so glad to be with you once again. It is good to have you tuning in. Des, my friend, how are you this week? Are you well?
I am amazingly good for a man of my age and physical condition.
A little too much information, but thank you
sorry about
for clearing that up for us. Hey, look, in all seriousness, if you'd like to find out a bit more about this former Englishman and former Irishman, you can do that at momentumaustralia.org. And of course, most importantly, why Momentum exists, why we're here. What's in this for you in the next half an hour, but generically when you tune into Momentum. Love you to check out the website, have a look around, momentumaustralia.org. And also you'll see a big number on the front of the website. And Des is going to tell us a bit more about that. It's been a fairly recent introduction to Momentum, Des, but it's something that we're really, really excited about, hey?
Yeah, we sure are. We're very blessed to have set up a support line for men, the Momentum Care Line. And significantly, that number is very easy for men to remember, which is good for me. So it's 1-800-000-MEN, 1-800-000-636. Services provided by our friends at Careline Connections. You can reach out to the Care Line 7 days a week from 9 a.m. to 11 p.m., 1-800-000-MEN.
Love it.
Before we get into this week's show, we recommend you grab a notebook and a pen or take some notes on your phone, because I believe there's going to be a lot of stuff here that's going to be really helpful in the next half hour or so. Maybe not for you right now, but maybe for you in the future. But certainly there'll be people in your world who really will benefit from the sort of things we're going to talk about.
Yeah, 100%. When a relationship breaks down, and particularly in times of separation, everybody involved needs some degree of support and advice. And in the case of a marriage breakdown where children are involved, not always, but it tends to be that the kids stay in the family home with mum, and it tends to be that dad then moves out and has to find somewhere else to live.
So often in times like this, we hear men talk about the difficulties they face when it comes to engaging lawyers, navigating demands from former partners, the bitterness, all the stuff that happens in that world, and trying to maintain a fair and equitable access to kids.
Parents Beyond Breakup is an incredible charity that supports parents experiencing trauma related to family breakdown and separation. And their Dads in Distress service in particular helps men find hope, support, and a platform that they can use as they navigate the tricky waters after a separation.
And so you might want to just check out their website, which is parentsbeyondbreakup.com. And we have the Hunter and Central Coast Project Manager for Parents Beyond Breakup, Rob Hoyle. Is it Hoyle? It's a party.
Hoyle.
There you go. With us this week. Welcome to Momentum, Rob.
Thanks very much for the welcome.
That's really cool.
Rob, we just want to say from behind the scenes, you reached out to us at Momentum, and we just shared a little bit off air that Des and I have both had stories relating to breakups and relationship breakdowns and things like that, and we are just so excited that you reached out to us, because we just see such a benefit in what you have to offer. I mean, we wish that you guys were around, or we knew about you when we were going through our stuff, but the thing is you are. And we're so glad to get you on the show, because men all around Australia are dealing with this, and maybe potentially in the future dealing with this. So we're super thrilled to get you on and tell us a bit more about, Parents Beyond Breakup. I suppose, tell us a bit about your own story before we launch into what you guys do. How did you find yourself at Parents Beyond Breakup?
Well, unfortunately, like you two guys, I've experienced the pains and frustrations of separation and custody, and also financial split. And I know that was one of the most unpleasant parts of my whole life. Mm. And I guess the Lord created an opportunity for me in terms of major sickness some 5 or 6 years ago. Put me on the process of going back to study. I already had 1 degree. So over the period of recovery, I managed to get another degree and a master's degree, and that was in divinity and chaplaincy. So I finished that in 2019, prayed to the Lord that I could be utilised in the kingdom, and it seemed like the very first job that came up in the new year was with Parents Beyond Breakup.
Wow.
I interviewed and I was employed almost within a week. So
that's amazing.
Maybe my
Obviously
CV was just perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. I love how you said there that the Lord created an opportunity through sickness. That's really interesting, isn't it?
Oh, it blew me away.
Look at those times, yeah?
Yeah, he pulled me up. I was on a course to nowhere. It was a positive course, but yeah, I was working I started my own landscaping contracting business as part of a recreation process for myself, and I was working myself into the ground. I wasn't a young guy, but I was working as hard as the 30-year-olds that I was employing and living the lifestyle of a 30-year-old, which I wish I could, but I can't.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about the background to Parents Beyond Breakup. How did it come about as an organization?
Well, it started in Coffs Harbour about 23 years ago, where there was a dad who was going through the major problem of separation, and he invited a few of his mates to the balcony, and that just kept on growing. So the start was 23 years ago, and we're fortunate to still have the advice of the founding father there, as well as one of the other founders is still employed on our helpline. So there's some degree of longevity there. So that's how it started, just basically out of somebody seeing the need and starting it in Coffs Harbour, and it spread from there. And
just on that, we should add that their helpline for Parents Beyond Breakup is 1300-853-437, and that includes a subgroup called Dads in Distress. So it's 1300-853-437.
Sorry, Des, I was just going to say, I love how that was just one guy who was going through something and went, hey, there's no one really here that I can reach out to. I'm just going to invite a few mates over. And, we talk about this on Momentum all the time about men particularly reaching out and getting connected, but being intentional with that, because if we don't, it's not, generally doesn't happen, right? I mean, any relationship takes intentionality, whether that's, a marriage or friendships or whatever. But for the guys, particularly, we tend to not want to do that. And particularly if we're going through stuff, we tend to want to bunker down and isolate rather than actually reach out when we're going through a tough time. So I love the fact that that was just the genesis for this, to go, hey, you know what? I'm not sure what to do, but I'm just going to invite some mates over. And from there, here we are 23 years down the track. I love your tagline for Dads in Distress, which is, I think, empowering families. And I love that. So tell us a bit about some of the things that you do with Parents Beyond Breakup to do that along the journey of separation, marriage, separation, breakdown, that sort of thing.
Well, essentially, it's a peer support group. And so what we get, the dads participating through sharing their own situation. And we have a section of the meeting that's called the check-in, where the dads actually are given a stone, which is the talking stone, and they have the floor. So no interruptions from me or from any of the other dads, and they just say it like it is. So that sharing is very cathartic, and it's also very therapeutic to know that they're actually putting words to their feelings, and sometimes for the very first time.
Yeah, that speaks into momentum, and that's exactly what we encourage men to do when they're struggling with whatever in life. Just get along, a couple of guys that you can trust, that you can get alongside, and start to talk about what's happening in your world.
Yep, exactly.
So, Rob, tell us a bit more about those groups. Are they all around the country, or at this stage, are they just in certain pockets? And a bit about, I suppose, how they run.
Well, like you guys, we have a helpline, which is manned 6 days a week at the moment. It's going to 7. That is probably the emergency triage. And we have a national coverage at the moment with something like 5 or 6 online groups a week. And we have 3 or 4 locations where we do face-to-face groups. Whilst I'm there, that they're Dads in Distress, that's the name of the groups, but we also have at the moment one Mums in Distress group that's conducted online, and hopefully within the next few weeks we'll have a face-to-face group starting in the Central Coast. So primarily we're focused on men because that's the biggest need, but there's no shortage of women in the same situation.
Sure. So to clarify, Rob, let me just clarify for people listening, even if they're not, say, in New South Wales or Hunter Valley or whatever, there's something online that they can tune into wherever they are in Australia, correct?
Exactly. And we're in the process of rolling out to all the major population centres through 2023. We've been very lucky to get a government grant that enables us to put on, we were looking at the numbers the other day in a staff meeting, something like 300 odd people to support the program, volunteers, not all paid, across the country.
Yeah. So therefore there will be face-to-face groups, hopefully by the end of this year, all around Australia.
Yep.
I want to just encourage all the radio stations that take our show, and also all the men who are listening. Just think about, maybe if I've been through it or you're in the middle of it, think about maybe setting up one of those groups in your town. So we are broadcast right across Australia to small towns, to major towns, right across this great land. And so the radio stations and men who are listening, why don't you think about contacting Parents Beyond Breakup and setting up one of these groups?
Awesome. Yeah.
Good, Des. Rob, let's just go back a step and let me ask you, we talked about in the introduction some of the main challenges that parents face particularly, but let's talk about dads for a moment. What do you, in your experience with, dads in distress particularly, what do you think are some of the main challenges that men face in the initial stages of separation?
It boils down to pure frustration and hopelessness. And if that's not controlled, it very soon moves into depression. And if that's not controlled, there can be suicidality. So it's mainly frustration. Blokes that deal with things, compartmental, box by box way. And if one of their boxes is broken, and they find it very hard to move to the next box to improve their situation. Yeah, so it becomes a frustration response, really.
Right.
I can remember whenever I was going through my first divorce, having done it twice, and there was I had nobody. My family were in Ireland. I had nobody I could turn to. I wasn't involved with church. I wasn't involved with groups. I worked hard, and absolutely nobody that I could approach. And so I'm sure there's hundreds of men who maybe listen to this show who are in that same situation, and the frustration and the anger and the guilt and all the stuff associated with that separation just plays on your mind.
Exactly.
Rob, can I just expand that a little further? And I mean, we can all, and those of us who've been through it can understand where that some of the frustrations come from. But again, just to give us a blanket overview from your experience, what do you think are some of the key frustration points for men in a breakup? Is it that they're treated differently? Is it that the system treats them differently? Is it that their life changes? Is it that they find themselves on their own? Like, what are some of the key triggers, particularly for some of the things that can really trigger that sense of frustration, hopelessness, and I don't know what to do here. I've got I feel like my hands are behind my back kind of feeling.
Unfortunately, one of the major triggers for men is the AVO, Apprehended Violence Order. And for a lot of guys, it's something that they have no idea about. And in a lot of cases, it's their first interaction with the law. And that creates so much trauma and stress trying to control something that is being mandated on them by the government or by the police force. And that is one of the unfortunate major triggers.
Okay, well, let's explore that, because that's something I'm not super familiar with. So, I mean, obviously there's times where it's appropriate that these things are put in place. From what I'm gathering, and I may be reading into this incorrectly, but what I'm saying, I think you're saying is that sometimes that can get used and abused a little bit.
Totally. I call it weaponization of the AVO. And I've consulted with senior police people, and they say that the AVO is really nothing much to worry about. It's when it's an ADVO, which is applied by the police, that is when it becomes a really important criminal matter. And the further advice is that most of the AVOs are based on hearsay. She said this, I said that, and a general non-specific event. But an ADVO will probably have evidentiary evidence, such as a photograph or some other thing that says that point of violence actually did happen. And that's the one that people need to really, or dads need to understand that is major. But an AVO, it's just a system. It's probably a time out would probably be a nice way to put it, in a softer form.
I'm assuming then that there's some men that don't necessarily feel like that when even if it's the lighter end of the scale, in inverted commas, the AVO, that if that's put upon them or placed upon them to some degree, that they feel like they're a terrible person, terrible husband, terrible dad, that they've overstepped, and maybe in their heart perhaps that wasn't the case.
Totally. I've had several guys turn up in tears, totally distraught about the ramifications of it. Generally, we've been able to get a more balanced view over a fairly short period of time, and then they see the light and they can start moving forward.
Let's talk about the difference between what is an AVO, how do people get one, what value does it have, as opposed to an ADVO, because I'd never heard those two separate terms. Rob?
Yeah, an AVO, anybody is able to place an AVO. Is essentially a device to create separation between different parties, and it could be on any amount of allegations, and those allegations don't need to be substantiated. So I could say I'm threatened by your overbearing personality, Des, and if I could get an AVO on the basis of that.
Wow.
That's a trivial example,
Yeah.
but an ADVO is really by the same example as if I get up and punch you in the shoulder, that is physical violence, and there'd be a good chance you could go away and get a date stamped photograph as evidence that actually happened. And that, if was taken to the police, they will be likely to create an ADVO, which is a police mandated order.
Wow.
Can I go back a step then? The AVO, who actually enforces that?
It's enforced by rules that you can't impinge the person that has created the AVO. So if the AVO is against your ex, you can't go within a specified distance of it. And that the AVO will actually specify what that is. And so you can be precluded from seeing your kids. You can be precluded from
so
the house.
An AVO can be by either party, I presume?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And where would I go to get an AVO? Do I have to go to the police station, or how would I do it?
Or the courthouse.
Oh, the courthouse. Okay.
Right.
But,
and obviously then there's a greater degree of severity and seriousness around an ADVO, which then comes from the police.
Yeah.
Tell us about then the ramifications of having something like that on your life over an AVO.
Well, you're in the police system. If you breach it, it's a criminal matter. If you breach an AVO, it still is a criminal matter, but it's not held in such high regard by the police.
Sure. We've said a couple of times, and so I just want to clarify this, because I would hate for women, particularly listening right now, to feel like we're targeting them and saying, it's skewed towards you, the system is skewed towards you, as men get a raw deal. So let's just clarify that and say, in your experience, Rob, does it tend to feel like men do get a bit of a raw deal with the system? Do you tend to find that the AVOs and the ADVOs particularly do get used against men unfairly at times? Is that a fair comment to say?
It seems in a lot of cases it's a strategy that's probably contrived by legal advice to create a space that will preclude the male from interacting with the family for a period of time, 12 months or thereabouts.
So if I'm on the receiving end of either one of those, Rob, can I just ask, if I'm on the receiving end of one of those and I disagree, right? Say if someone wants to put that on me and I go, actually, it's false, I don't believe that was the case. What then avenues do men have, or women have, if that's the case, to argue that and try and, I suppose, get that thrown out and say it's actually not applicable?
Before any of them are put in place, there's a hearing.
Okay.
So the hearing is the opportunity to explain your position, really. And if it is clearly hearsay evidence or a contrivance, generally the court or the magistrate will see through that. Guys can be victims of domestic violence and also recipients of some degree of safety under an AVO. I've got one dad who, it's almost comical, is the only person in New South Wales that I know was actually bitten in a dog park by his ex.
Oh,
in a public place, and there was physical marks. So the police came in and basically placed an ADVO on her, on the ex, and yeah, that was the start of her being banned from interactions, and it was quite reasonable too.
wow. It's a very dangerous situation to be in, I guess, having either to enforce one or have one enforced on you. What
Exactly.
effect does it have psychologically on men or women to have that imposed on them?
Well, it's another layer of absolute frustration. You're precluded by law from seeing, in some cases, your children. And then it falls into a myriad of other frustrations, like parental control orders and supervised visitation, where the dad may only see his children if it's supervised by a third party.
Yes.
You know, that is just so amazing that
Yeah,
happens.
And what the issuer of the ADVO, for example, can say greatly influences access. For example, I know of one example where the guy lives in Port Macquarie. His daughter lives with his estranged partner in Tamworth, and there was an ADVO, I believe, and he got to see his daughter once a month supervised.
Yeah.
Crazy, really crazy.
I've got one guy who has, could you believe, 8 hours visitation a year, 2 hours every quarter.
Wow.
Just
it's very hard to
amazing.
maintain relationships in that case.
Yeah, no, you
Rob,
just imagine the state this guy gets in.
Let's just absolutely. Let's speak into that for a moment then. When a dad particularly, we're going to speak to the dads now for a tick, but when men and dads particularly come to you in those sorts of circumstances, what sorts of things do you offer? But what sorts of things do you say to help men in that space? I mean, that's a really tricky headspace to be in, and as you said, it leads to frustration, hopelessness, and sadly, in some cases, suicide too.
Yep, agree. Well, what we try to do is have a triage, essentially. And before the guy leaves the first meeting, when he presents in a distressed state, we make sure that he's ticked off a couple of key points. And those key points are focused around his own mind health and physical health. And the first one is to make sure he has some medical support. He may need some medication, or he may need then referral for some psychiatric or psychological or counselling support, so the doctor can work that through. And then the most practical thing anybody in that position can do is to start getting involved with some degree of physical education or physical activity.
And most men wouldn't think about that at all, in terms of the physical process and the helping that is in helping address the mental state.
Exactly. Yeah. And, they're in stress and trauma, and it's very hard to think proactively and creatively when you're stressed and traumatized. So trying to reduce that stress and trauma is the first step. Then after that, there's obvious pathways, talking to a solicitor to get some good practical support, not necessarily through the legal system. Sometimes it's outside the legal system, but to get somebody who has a heart for the person as well as an understanding of the law. And there are some solicitors out there that do have that.
One of the things you mentioned, Rob, was that you have support groups or men, dads in distress, and you talked about getting men get together online or offline, physically together, and they talk about their issues. And you mentioned the fact they have a stone that's passed and they have the right to talk and so forth. Talk to us about those groups, because they're obviously really helpful for men to know that at least somebody else is going through what they're going through, and they're able to coach it and help each other. I think it's fantastic.
Yep. Well, it's normally structured over a 2-hour period, and the first half of it is what we call a check-in, where that stone that you mentioned is passed around the group, and that gives you talking rights. Theoretically, nobody should interrupt until you've had your say. So that everybody has a chance to have their say, and then we generally break for a quick coffee, and then the second half is what we call a campfire, where the facilitator, i.e. the group moderator, picks up on some common element that could well be AVOs, it could be communication, it could be stress and trauma. And then the campfire is a discussion about that particular topic, or in some cases, the discussion from the first half keeps on rolling into the second half because there's so much to say in the check-in phase. But we always finish with a checkout, which is basically how they're feeling now. And I always try and get the dads to try and think about what they're going to do in the next week to make their situation a little better. So it's about thinking about what you're going to do, not just keeping wallowing in the same cesses.
Yeah. Rob, speak to the guys listening right now, because there will be guys listening who are going through some of the stuff that we've been talking through, right? And now they've heard that there's an opportunity for a group or to get together with other guys. That doesn't necessarily appeal straight up. And let's be honest, sometimes for guys, it is the last thing we want to do is get together with other blokes and talk about some of the stuff we're going through. So I suppose just some thoughts and encouragement to the guys listening, if they are in that space. Why should they, or why would they consider joining a group like this? What's ultimately the benefit? We know the benefit, but to get them over the hurdle to go, this is actually really good for you, you should consider this.
Yeah, I agree. One of the big barriers is anxiety, and guys build up an anxiety that it's going to be an uncomfortable scenario or situation. And I've had several guys that have put their hand up as being anxious before they've started. And after going to just one group, their anxiety is totally broken away. So they feel open and willing that it's a safe and positive environment to share their thoughts with. And so they keep on coming. So I guess the facilitator is always aware of those people that are anxious, and we address our approach appropriately. But in general, most guys that come feel empowered because they know that they're not alone and that other people are going through similar, or even in a lot of cases, worse scenarios. And that gives them a sense of self-confidence that they're able to handle their own situation. And it's amazing how the groups can actually create learning experiences based on practical experience, and that's shared so readily by guys in these groups. So yeah, it can be daunting, and I know anxiety is a real hindrance for people to come, but be assured that we're aware of that, and we try and not make it as daunting as some might think.
So what sort of training do you give the facilitator? Obviously, as a guy comes in, he has got this burden to help men in his world, in somewhere, wherever he happens to be, Toowoomba or wherever it happens to be, and he wants to set up a group. What sort of training and coaching do you give that individual?
Yeah, we have an extensive online coaching support, and then it goes into practical learning experiences. Nobody is put out on a group without spending a time as being a co-facilitator.
Okay.
So depending on the individual and their own level of confidence, you can be a co-facilitator as long as you like, or if you feel like putting your hand up, you can be a solo facilitator. I recently had a trainee in Newcastle, and he is arguably probably a better facilitator than I, because he's had relevant business experience in that area, and he took to it like a duck on water. Others need to build their confidence a little more, and we're aware that you've got to experience it to understand it. And in some cases, you've got to work out how to handle the triggers yourself, because some of these stories can trigger your own experiences. But yeah, that's a process. You learn how to, I guess, control your own thoughts too.
Rob, if guys listening then want to perhaps put their hand up and be a part of this year, which you are looking for people, I guess the parentsbeyondbreakup.com website is the best place to go. That's
where you start. It's about a 12-minute questionnaire online just to give you an idea of what our objectives are, what we do, how we do it. And at the end of that, then the next step of training begins. it's like a 12-minute get to know you process.
Mm.
And then it's personal after that.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool.
Look, we encourage you, if this is your heart and you've been stirred by some of the stuff that we've been talking about and you want to step into this space and help other blokes, parentsbeyondbreakup.com is that website. And look, we've covered a fair bit in this show. Some of it we've skimmed the surface of, it feels, but also there's been a lot in the show. Rob Hoyle has been our special guest from Parents Beyond Breakup. That website again is parentsbeyondbreakup.com. Encourage you to have a good look around there. And also take note of the helpline number again, 1300-853-437. And of course, our Momentum Care line, 1-800-000-636. That's 1-800-000-MEN. And the Momentum website, momentumaustralia.org. One thing before we wrap up, with regards to Parents Beyond Breakup, they offer an incredible thing online, and you'll see it at the website, the separation checklist. And this offers some simple keys and helpful advice to help parents move forward well following a breakup or separation. And Rob is going to be on Momentum again next week, and we're going to talk through the separation checklist. This is just awesome and something that is really, really practical in this space. But Rob, we thank you for your time today, mate, and we're looking forward to speaking with you again next week.
Thanks very much for the opportunity.
Our pleasure.
Thank you for watching this week's show, and we hope you subscribe to Momentum so you can find out what's happening in the shows in the future.
Absolutely. And keep an eye on our website too. That's momentumaustralia.org. There you'll find all of our shows and a whole heap of resources to help you on your journey. That is momentumaustralia.org.
Until next time, keep moving forward
with Momentum.